All right, we're sitting down today. Next episode, Lever Up with Lars Vaule, an industry veteran that's focused on turnarounds and getting things done and fixing broken companies. So super nice to have you out today. Why don't you give us a little bit about your background and then we can just dive right in.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Paul. I'm thinking back to, when my friend first DM'd me one of your posts on Twitter, and I was like, who the hell is this guy? And we're on this trajectory of followers that was going stratospheric. And I was like, this guy gets it. So it's a pleasure to be here in person and chatting a little bit.
Super. Was that the time when I was still anonymous?
Totally. And I actually did some intel work.
Did you figure me out?
I figured you out.
I figured you out.
But I hesitated to reach out until you kind of came clean. And I'm glad I did. It's a pleasure to be here.
There are a couple of people at my former firm that were seeing this happen, and there was definitely a quest. And the way they figured it out was some slides I had posted on LinkedIn for our veteran series matched the slides that I was posting on Twitter.
I did sort of a geographic industry, and then there was a couple of similarities that I saw.
You're in good company with the special ops guys out there, because they 100%, are with that approach. Yeah. Okay, let's dive right. So your background.
So my background, as you mentioned, I've been doing turnarounds probably for the last 5 years or so, and stepping in as an interim executive in the lower middle market, primarily manufacturing oriented businesses. And it kind of takes two basic steps or two basic shapes. I'll come as an interim CEO to effect a turnaround, which, by definition means that things are hitting the fan. And then sometimes I've come in as a fractional CFO or COO, where you have leadership that is sound but recognizes they need more depth, or they're in a inflection point in their growth, and they need to understand, what do we need for that next level executive? And I can help kind of guide that.
So you're day one at a restructuring asset.
Yeah.
The team is probably demoralized, right? The creditors are on the fence. Usually when I would get the call in my former life, it was, it was okay in July. It was okay in August. Wait a minute. It doesn't look like they're throwing off much cash. We were in the second lien, and then we get a call in October.
Right.
We can't make payroll. So the team's demoralized, right? And, we saved the payroll, obviously, but what's that like day one in the chair of an asset that just isn't making it happen?
Well, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Right. I stepped into my background spans manufacturing, all kinds of different stuff, and stepped into a situation where the investors in a business felt that CEO was not turning things around.
Yeah.
Production was on a decline. Revenues were on the decline. And it was a very, very toxic relationship between the board and the CEO, who was a major shareholder. I was on deck for a month, during which time the court was reviewing shareholder votes.
Yeah.
Before the board's decision to terminate the CEO was approved by a judge. So that came down on Thursday, and I showed up Monday morning.
Was this a public company?
No.
So why do
publicly held? I've worked in one publicly held business before as the chief operating officer, but the bulk of my experience has been, again, in the lower middle market, $5 to $50 million in revenue, where, these companies are typically privately held.
What was the constraint where the ownership group didn't have the decision-making capability from the CEO?
That's just that. I would say that was just legacy stuff in terms of the document stuff in terms of who had voting control, etc. And they had to pull together a majority, which was disputed.
So what was the big three problems that drove the company to be insolvent?
There's the nuts and bolts, right? Which are always kind of the same, right? Yields were down, quality was down.
Yeah.
Sales, as a result, sales were down. And there was no clear path in place to rectify it.
Yeah.
Right. In my experience, that kind of comes from three different fundamental issues, right? Either you have a very insecure leadership that is not able to rally the team together.
Yeah.
They don't want to give up their control. They're kind of dictating stuff. You have a CEO perhaps who starts to view the company as their own.
Yep.
They forget about the fact that people have invested capital into this thing. They have an obligation to support and serve that investment, right? Or you have people that are well-intentioned or just kind of not operations people or not finance people. They've founded this business because they've got great sales acumen, but it gets away from them and needs help.
Yeah.
In this case, I think it was a combination of A and B, where you had a very insecure leader who was out of his depth, very controlling, and also viewed it as his business, right? Notwithstanding the multi-millions of dollars that were invested in it by outside parties.
Yeah.
So step one, when you show up, is just to stabilize everybody's mindset. There is not a single person in that building who is not thinking about their job at that point.
Yeah.
Right. And, the only progress you're going to be able to make in the first day or two is simply getting people to calm down and take a breath. And that's really the key focus. I cannot tell you what we're going to do because I don't know enough about this situation yet. I may have some preconceived notions. In this case, I have a month to kind of look at some of the financials, right?
Yeah.
But it's always different on the ground. As your team here, it's amazing the parallels, right, between this kind of stuff and what the folks with the special operations background have shared with me. But, until you are boots on the ground, you don't really know. And then you've got to start digging. And so step one is just stabilize people, begin to get to know people, and reassure them that, I'm well-intentioned. We're here to turn this thing around, and I'm going to need your help.
So given that, I always find it's a people issue, right? It's a
100%.
people issue. So I call people nows, laters, and nevers.
Okay.
You've got people on the bus that are like ready to go. It's usually N-2 guys that are like been waiting for someone to come in and rescue them.
Yeah.
And then laters that, kind of some people don't get on board if they see it getting good. And then there's the nevers you got to get rid of.
Yep.
What's your process? I have a process for collating them. What's your process for doing the Harry Potter sorting hats and deciding who goes and who stays? And how fast do you make that decision?
The decision's kind of driven to an extent by how much runway you've got.
Okay.
Right? So my first order of business is always to understand the cash flow of the business and how much runway do we have here? What do we have to work with?
Yeah.
Right. So I call them the early adopters, the mass market, and the Luddites who are never going to buy an iPhone.
That's good.
Okay. And, the early adopters, they're great. They've been itching for someone to come in and lead this thing in a way that is constructive.
Yeah.
The mass market, many of them will come along when they start to see the progress. The Luddites, honestly, I might spend as much time with them as I do the early adopters early on.
Yeah.
So I want to understand how toxic is their opposition or their attitude, and also understand where's that coming from, right? Because I've seen many examples of folks who were difficult and they got to that place because they were so disillusioned and kind of bitter.
Yeah.
Right? Like they could be an amazing contributor, but they've gotten shut down enough that they're now opposed to everything. And if they can turn around, they can be outstanding. Dividing between those and the folks who are just not going to get on the bus can take a little time. So that's where the runway becomes a little bit.
So it's interesting. If you can get a negative person that's complaining all the time flocked around, they'll become like your biggest standard bearer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's go to your career a little bit. When did you figure out the broken company, good company on a bad day was what you wanted to be doing? So I have a similar way, and I like it because, the metaphor I always use is if you're in the bathroom at a restaurant and your 4-year-old starts choking, you expect me to do the Heimlich while you're gone. If you've got a typical private equity asset, it's, banker run process that's growing at 5% a year, you can't really move as fast. There's lots of syndication. That's why I like the space. What happened to make you make the decision that you like the space?
So I started my career out of college working for a business that my dad bought with a couple of his friends before I was born. Oh. And I was working on the plant floor, making stuff with a team of people that ranged from like, chemists on down to guys on the line who had an 8th grade education. Right?
Yeah.
That was sort of my formative, early experience. And then I went off and I did a couple of startups before and after business school.
Yep.
The excitement of that startup energy kind of became an addictive element, right? And I was working on a startup. This is now, 15 plus years ago, working on a startup, and my father passed away suddenly. And so I had to re-engage with our business that our family's involved in.
Yeah.
And so I ended up then running that business for 4 or 5 years. There were some things that we had to address and to work on, and, was able to take that business to double the revenue over the span of 4 years.
Wow.
And along the way, address some of the issues that had occurred, and where I saw people's eyes light up because they were engaged in a better way, So that brought me back to manufacturing, back to operations, and, without any major detours, I've really remained in that space since then. But I find that the combination of like that startup turnaround pace and energy is really exciting and fun. And I love working with a really wide range of people.
It's interesting because a startup and restructuring has a similar feel.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing everything. You're burning cash.
You are.
Right. You're burning cash in both situations. And there's a time
You've got runway.
you got to go to a raise, or you got to go to the creditors and ask for another liquidity,
Well, you're sold.
or you're done.
Yeah.
I never thought about before. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the business where you were on the side for a month, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to take over. How did you determine this thing was worth saving, or you were able to save it from an outside in perspective?
Well, the investors were committed to getting it back on track.
Okay.
Right. And my engagement was to stabilize it and do exactly that.
Yeah.
The challenge was both operational and financial structure. In my first 30 days, I spent time on the floor and brought in some colleagues who could help on the floor. But I was also holed up with the controller probably 5 hours a day trying to untangle the books.
Yeah.
And the company was going through an audit in parallel. So there was a lot of back and forth with the auditors, asking them questions, feeding them information. But, I basically uncovered a $1 million swing in operational profit that, let's just say, had been mischaracterized.
Oh.
So, that added to the ire amongst the shareholders, and there was quite a bit of litigation going on. So they wanted to get that shareholder litigation resolved,
Yeah.
clean up the slate. And then in the meantime, I was working on stabilizing the business. So we had to put in effect a turnaround plan, which I'm sure, it's the same kind of fundamental playbook that you'd see in any operations business, where you put in some lean principles, you start to get people engaged.
Yeah.
We did a 5S where they couldn't believe that I'm picking up the broom, right? And just working with folks to try to identify what are the issues, how are we going to iron them out? Trust me, I'm not here to bite your head off. And you start to make progress.
So it's funny you said pick up a broom. One of the leadership lessons I learned when I was in the Navy is like the worst job is using the trash disposal unit, which is you're smashing trash, and the floor's got like sludge in it of product. If I could just, it's like this.
It's on a ship.
It's on a submarine, and
so that the smell has nowhere to go.
No, and they would say it's filtered, but it's not. And I remember the stories of the captain, like going in there the first day, or at halfway night, which is halfway through deployment, and smashing trash for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then the new captain that got to the boat when I was there, these green coveralls when it's nasty, really nasty. And he was field daying in the electrical space with us, cleaning in the electrical space. And I asked my chief, I'm like, are we supposed to stop him? And he's like, I don't know. He's doing a good job. Let's let him keep going. And, but I learned that you don't have to do everybody's job every day. You have to be willing to.
Yeah.
And the takeaway from that is like the first job when I took my first, like a kind of plant manager job, day one, I was out there making batches and dumping 50-pound bags into the mixers, right? Well, I did it for 8 hours, but it's a little bit of a shock and awe.
Yeah.
For the team. All right. Was there a situation in this, I'm going to stay on this one asset.
Sure.
In this one asset where like it was really dark and you were like, this thing isn't going to make it.
I try not to ever let myself get there.
Okay.
Okay. Like just as in the startup where you have to have a certain amount of irrational
optimism
and faith. And, the team can't see you despondent over the prospects, right? At the end of the day, I think there's a transition between, you go in, nothing. All you can do is kind of go by first principles and say, listen, I know if we apply kind of a framework that we know generates results. I'm a big believer in a healthy process, a good process leads to a good outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not a cookie cutter, but, there's like a transition probably where you're doing the things that you know should work. And it isn't necessarily paying off immediately. That's the kind of roller coaster that comes with the territory.
Yeah.
And, I think I've built enough resilience to say, listen, okay, our yields are still abysmal.
Yeah.
Right.
What's abysmal percent wise, like first time right or whatever you want to call it? Like 70% or is it like 20%?
Oh, yeah. I need to be a little cautious.
Okay.
In terms of
fair enough.
Because I want to be respectful of the confidentiality that comes with kind of jumping into a turnaround. Nobody wants to see their dirty laundry, aired. But let's say in my career, all right, I've dealt with, just to step back, right, to give you an example.
Yeah.
I've dealt with turning around and improving businesses in a wide range of industries, plastic molding, machining, and cannabis, for example, right? So plastic molding, you've got cycle times that, it's measured in the seconds.
Yeah.
Right. Cannabis, your cycle times are measured in months.
Oh, because it's growing season.
It's growing.
Yeah.
Right. So, let's just to simplify, and from the time you plant a seed to harvest something, it's 16 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. So in that sense, you may have put in all the right things.
Yeah.
But you don't know for a really long time. In an injection molding operation, you start putting in the right things. The feedback loop is a whole lot tighter, right? So
I got it.
That's really challenging, and you have to convince people that they're going to see results within a reasonable time frame. It's different for different businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. Okay, what's the balance between urgency and strategy when you're in these restructuring situations?
That's a great question. I think, again, I come back to how much runway do you have?
Yeah.
What's the cash flow situation? I know you've talked a lot about 13-week cash flows.
Always.
Huge believer, right? There really isn't any other metric that I would use or tool to put in place. And you've got to watch that like a hawk. But to your question, like urgency versus strategy, the strategy is let's get better at a plant level, at an operational level.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get better. And whether you're, implementing lean or I always make the goal, for example, required reading.
Yeah.
For
my favorite book.
Anybody in a supervisory role. And then, with some luck, they start talking about it and people start asking if they can borrow it. And you start getting people to get intrigued by the path that we're on, right? But urgency versus strategy, if the pressure's on, I've certainly dictated changes. I hate to do it.
Yeah.
But when you see something that's really obvious and you need to put a financial win on the table and you need to fix something fast, that is evident if you've spent your career in manufacturing and resolving these kinds of issues, it can make sense to just dictate it.
Yeah.
That's not a good long-term strategy. You have to get the people, embracing it, a different kind of process, a different kind of culture. And if everything is just forced, from above, that culture isn't going to really change. They're just going to be jumping to a different tune. but they're not going to be humming their own tune and making progress together. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It did. Let's go into like a specific example. So
yeah,
I'll talk about an innovative solution I did real quick.
sure.
So I was doing a glass company that did the double pane windows,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them had the e-coating on it, and then the inside one didn't, right? And they had a bottlenecked machine. I thought it was because of the goal.
Yeah.
And we went to the team, and they were making the panels on the exact same machine. And I was at a meeting. I'm like, why don't you just make the e-glass and buy the regular glass? And the company was so close to their problem, they couldn't even see that.
Yeah.
See that? Can you give me an example of something creative you did? And I agree with you, there's a standardized, but I'd love to hear an example of something creative you did in restructuring.
So one of the things that I always worry about is be really careful about what you measure. Right.
Okay.
So I came into a plastic molding operation, and they were in kind of a death spiral where as productivity was declining, they were starting to raise prices, and that reduced demand.
Yeah.
So you look at it, and I couldn't understand why the plant manager was staffing the machines the way that they were. These are machines that could operate, let's say, with anywhere from 1 to 3 people, because you got a couple secondary operations as well.
Yep.
And every single one was manned by one person. So the result was the cycle times were like 2 to 3 times what it would be if you had 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I learned was the previous regime had dictated that you watch your labor cost.
Yeah.
That was the number one focus. So the solution, right? Be careful what you wish for. The solution was never staff these 3 machines with anything more than one person, which absolutely blew your contribution per hour out of the water. Like, it just was terrible. And in that case, I said, let's get crazy. Let's put 2 people on this thing and see what happens. Lo and behold, they started producing 3 times as much in the course of a day.
What did you get? What kind of pushback did you get when you were approaching that scenario?
Well, no, I'm going to get my head bit off when corporate hears about this, right? I said, time out. I've done enough.
I'm corporate.
Think of me as corporate. I'll take the heat. I know this will work. It's just an experiment. Let's see what happens. And we did. Now, I will say that within a matter of weeks, I determined that the GM of the plant just didn't make sense on an ongoing basis, right? And just couldn't get out of that mentality.
Yeah.
I said, let's put some money into brightening up the plant a little bit, right? In my mind, I'm thinking, maybe some new lights, fresh paint on the production floor, whatever. And the next time I come up the conference room, there's a guy installing drapes in the conference room. I'm like, not in the right direction here. So anyway, I ended up, having to terminate that individual and ran that plant on an interim basis for a few months while we searched for, a full-time GM.
Wow. It's interesting. I was at we'll call it a light manufacturing casting a little bit, but Slide Auto.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I was in a site, I saw siren come on the machine. Machine went down, and I got against the wall because I expected an operator to come running. Right. That just was the mentality. I expected to like feline it over to the thing.
Right. Crickets.
1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. And I'm just seeing the OEE chart just goes down. And we dig under the hood, they're running 20, 25 OEEs. People are very expensive when you're running machines at 20 OEE. When you're running at 85, they're very cheap.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't cost that much money to add another body. Okay. How would you measure success in restructuring beyond just we paid our creditors back and we're at steady state and we're not going to die?
We're not going to die. I think that my view of that success is rooted in having grown up in a family business.
Okay.
Where, when I returned to a leadership role in the business my dad had bought with some friends years ago, there were in the plant that I knew the best, there were, 50% of the employees I knew from when I'd worked there 20 years before. Real longevity. And in my view, the success in the organization is if we're growing and we're creating opportunity. We're not just throwing off cash for the team, okay? But who wants to work somewhere where there isn't opportunity for you to grow personally, grow professionally, and you can't do that if you're just hanging on, right? So, in my opinion, businesses that are not thriving and providing opportunity for people throughout the organization are not going to be able to attract and keep good people and grow it. So I think I know that's probably not like the kind of thing you may have had in mind, but to me, it covers a lot of stuff because you've got to be healthy, you've got to be growing, and you've got to have a culture in place that is engaging people where they feel like there's an opportunity for them to advance in life.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things, and I'm going to try to get him on the podcast too, is there was a guy with a GED that was at my plant, and I helped pay for him to go to school.
Yep.
And then now he has, now he has an MBA, and he's a safety director, an environmental safety director. He just found safety as a passion in the plant. This was a guy that was he was farting around in life. He was like 24, 25 at the time. And then we look back now, it's like, I saw on LinkedIn, it's like a director promotion. And I still had his number on my cell phone. I was like, wow, what a difference.
Yeah.
What a difference some support makes.
I'll tell you something, probably the most personally meaningful moment in my career was having turned a plant around. It's on that trajectory where it's healthy or on its way to really being healthy. And we're needing to hire more people. And we gathered a group of folks around, went out to I gathered the leadership of the facility. We went out to one of the machines and promoted the machine operator right there, socked him on the floor.
Yeah.
And we promoted him to a supervisor, like a team lead, which came with, a few more dollars on an hourly basis and a position of, responsibility and leadership on the floor. That change for him, he broke down crying.
That's incredible.
And so, these are folks, most of my friends from business school, are in finance, they're in consulting. They're not engaging with folks who are making, 15, 20 bucks an hour. But the difference between 15 and 20 bucks an hour is really meaningful and it's material to people. And, he said that it's just a huge change for his family. He had at that time, married with a young kid.
Yeah.
And so I've always kind of carried that experience with me for some perspective on the challenges that we're going through.
So let me ask you, so every single leadership book you read, whether it's one of the Simon Sinek type gurus, or it's John Maxwell's a little more spiritually grounded, says, take care of your people, create opportunities for them.
Yeah.
Why do so few leaders do those things?
Well, you got me. I mean, to me, I came to that, early in my career, I thought being smart and working hard was the right thing. And then I realized, you just can't do everything yourself. You need to work with people. And then you see it and you see the impact on the organization and the personal rewards that come from that as apart from the financial. I don't know why people don't get it. I think it's a different mindset.
Yeah.
It can be all numbers all the time or what's in it for me. As I said, I think that in my experience, the leading cause of getting a phone call where there's a company this size that needs somebody to step in, it's almost always leadership that is thinking about themselves and not thinking about it, from a standpoint of like servant leadership where, I want to work myself out of a job. That's how people are going to make things happen.
What is one mistake you made or kind of early in your career that you wish you learned something impactful for, not that you go back and change it, but it was a big learning lesson that we can teach some of our younger listeners that are in college or first job to help them prevent from making?
I think the biggest step I took in my career was when I realized that, perfectionism had sort of gotten me to where I was. And I realized that I had to set that aside because, perfectionism is the enemy of the good or what have you, right? And so trying to think of a couple of specific examples, but, early in my career, trying to move things forward on the plant floor, right? You drive people crazy, right? If it's constant perfectionism, particularly if they're not engaged and excited about leading that effort themselves and excited about making progress, you've got to encourage the small steps that people are taking.
Yeah.
Right. So, that was the biggest shift for me. And I'm reminded of I don't know if you know that there's a marketing viewpoint where people are sort of either what they call satisficers or optimizers.
Ooh, I'm familiar with this. Satisfier?
Satisfizer or an optimizer.
Okay.
Right. So a satisfizer is let's say you're looking for a new cell phone, right?
Yeah.
Satisfizer walks into the cell phone store, looks at a couple different ones, says, oh, I like that one. Oh, it's in blue and it's got a nice camera. Perfect. Good. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Right. An optimizer might walk in and spend 2 hours talking and looking at everyone and then leave and research them online and finally pick out a cell phone a week later.
Okay.
Right. Different strengths and weaknesses, right? So it's one thing if you're picking out, a tile for your renovation at home and you want it to be just right and if you're trying to make progress in a business, it's awful tough to be that optimizer mindset where you want to optimize every single decision with, analysis is paralysis, right? You cannot find the right solution. It's only by taking a step and seeing what happens as an outcome of that step, and then using your best judgment to make the next step.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's tied in with the perfectionism stuff. Like you're not going to figure out the solution from here to there from sitting here. You just got to start walking.
So it's interesting. So I tell my team, I'd rather you make 10 aggressive, quick decisions with imperfect data and 3 of them be wrong than you try to stew on 3 perfect decisions and 1 or 2 of them is going to be wrong anyway. Right. Like, that's what I'm saying. If you're in decimal point land in a turnaround, you're in trouble.
Right.
Okay. Given that, one of the questions I get a lot on X is, what do I need to do to get noticed by senior team members? Because the mid-level VP that's running me, they don't think they're given advice to handle the work of the day.
Yeah.
What do I do to get the senior team to put me in the good column?
Right. Well, bearing in mind, like my experience is in the lower middle market, middle market, and in startups where the organization is probably a lot more flat than some of the folks who might be asking that question, right? If I, as a leader, don't have some degree of visibility into folks throughout the organization, just in the sense of what they've got going on, then, I'm not really on top of things. The number one thing that I look for from a hiring standpoint is initiative.
Okay.
And I would add, and it's particularly among junior hires who may not be coming into the workforce with a lot of experience, right? They're fresh out of school. They want to get a job doing, investment banking. They want to get a job in a marketing role at a company. Oftentimes, the message they communicate in a cover letter will be, I'm really eager to learn, and I think your place would be a good place to work. To me, that's a huge mistake.
Okay.
Come up with something. You're going to learn a lot wherever you go. Come up with something where you think you can help. And everybody can demonstrate that, right? Even if you've come to it from, you've just graduated, you're nervous about applying for a job or interviewing for a job because you don't have any experience, right? If you say to me, listen, I went to your website, I read some stuff about the industry, I got to think that you're worried about AI, I don't know, whatever it may be. And, or I know you've got a new marketing initiative. I don't have a lot of experience, but I really want to roll up and help you address these problems. The people that voice that go to the top of my list.
Interesting. Yeah. I've never heard me give that piece of advice before. Okay. Other side, person gets through the door. They're 23. What's the biggest mistake you see new people on the bus make?
Thinking that they know what they're talking about.
Fair enough.
Right. Well, I mean, I think and that comes from being young and junior and maybe not being that secure in in the role that you're in.
Yeah.
So trying to present yourself as having the solutions as opposed to being candid and saying, I don't have the answer to that. Let me go find out. Right.
Yeah.
It may be, a junior banker role, you may damn well need to have the answer to that because that's your job.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, like, don't try and bluff your way through.
Okay.
Everybody at the table, knows that you're bluffing your way through. Just admit it and go figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. The last question I ask everybody, what's the book that's been the most impactful on your life or career in general?
I'm going to give you two.
Super.
One is The Goal, which we touched on.
Yeah.
Right. Terrific book. Gold Rat.
Yeah.
As I said, I make it required reading for every situation I step into. I also really like Stephen Covey's book on the
7 Habits.
7 Habits. Okay. So The Goal and 7 Habits, which my dad gave me when I was in college, and I looked at briefly and I was like, this is dumb, but it is. It's got a lot of really basic fundamental stuff. I also think that Nassim Taleb's Black Swan is a really good read. It's, it gets pretty technical in some spaces, but he kind of gets at some challenging concepts. The Drucker's Walk is another good one.
I haven't read
familiar with that one.
No.
It's in the same vein. It's by a physicist whose name is escaping me, but he's basically describing the kind of randomality in life. And I would encourage people to read The Drucker's Walk as well.
So on the same thread here, because you did 2 books, there is a dearth of statistics capabilities in almost every junior person that I work with, to a point that it's a gap. And they don't understand that going from 6.5 times leverage to 17 times leverage isn't like 8% more, whatever it is. It's like 50% more risky. And like not understanding that is how a lot of these restructuring situations happen in private equity today.
Interesting.
Lars, it's been super good to sit down with you. How do we get in touch with you?
Lars Vaule, my website is called pilotagepartners.com.
Yep.
And, try to speak to how you navigate through difficult situations.
So look, our guy Ben set up the sourcing engine. I'm going to open the envelope up to when he does the intent search to liquidity. And look, we got to find some place to work together. I think we'd have a blast.
I think we would too, man.
All right, bud. Good to talk to you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on Lever Up. We trust today's conversation provided meaningful insights into private equity and entrepreneurship. Stay connected by subscribing to our podcast for upcoming episodes.